Hey everybody!
Hello.
Terry White here, and I am pleased to be joined by Luke.
How's it going, everyone?
Travel
nice to see you today.
and adventure photographer.
That's me.
And also a Lightroom ambassador.
That's correct. Yes. So I've been a Lightroom ambassador for the past 8 months now. It's coming to an end over the next month, but it's been an incredible year.
So what does a Lightroom ambassador do?
So, I mean, some of the main things you can see here today, so doing talks for the community, also here at Adobe MAX, and then over the next few days I'm also doing some photo walks for the community, which is going to be really exciting. So for example, next year, if you're not here at Adobe MAX, next year you can get involved in the photo walks ran by the Lightroom ambassadors, and we also post about new Lightroom updates and things like that throughout the year.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So now you do travel and adventure photography.
That's correct.
So tell me, if you just want a free trip to go anywhere in the world and go back and shoot somewhere you've been before,
okay,
where would you go back to?
God, that's a hard question.
I know, that's why I asked it.
It's a good one though. I'd say
free. Go anywhere in the world.
One of my favorite locations ever is Japan.
Okay.
I think it's an incredible mix of culture. The people are so amazing. I'd say the amazing landscapes mixed with the architecture out there is just out of this world. So I'm going to say Japan.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, same question, but
Okay.
somewhere you haven't been. What's on the bucket list?
Okay, so funny enough, the bucket list is about to be fulfilled. So one of my absolute dream locations that I've been wanting to visit for so long is Venezuela. Okay. And in November, I'm going to be going there for a month and a half, which is probably the longest trip that I've ever done. And it's a full expedition, and we're going to be hiking to some of the tepui in Venezuela, taking in some of the animals there. It's going to be such an incredible time, and I'm so excited to go there.
All right, awesome. Now I could just stand here getting your resume all day long.
Yeah.
But I think what people really want to see is, it looks like you have a computer and you're ready to show some stuff.
I do indeed, yes.
And we have people in the audience asking questions and saying hi, so I will monitor the chat.
Cool.
So with that said, what do you want to show us first?
So I thought I might just show my simple editing process, and then as I go through it, answer any questions that come up on the chat about kind of how I, for example, add colors or remove certain things from my images and distractions, which is something that I'm going to be focusing on quite a bit later. It's one of my favorite things and one of the things that I really focus on Lightroom.
Okay, let's see it.
Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset this image and just run through the simple basics. Before I do that, I'm going to show you an after.
But wait, if I'm not a Lightroom user, what do you mean? You're resetting? Like you're getting rid of everything?
Yes. So basically,
you're resetting the edits, which are non-destructive.
The resetting the edits. Yes, of course. So I did this edit earlier. I actually did it quite a few months ago. It's one of my favorite shots from New York, and I'm going to take you through the process of it today. Now, it's a relatively simple process, so please follow along.
All right, I'm anxious to see it.
So I start off always with cropping, and often it really depends on what the medium I'm sharing my work on is, but usually my medium is Instagram and social media, so that will be a 4x5 times 8x10 crop. So I'll crop that just here and decide to move it around and straighten it based on how it looks and whether it looks good or not. And at the moment, I think that's looking pretty solid. Obviously, Lightroom as well comes with an automatic straighten tool, which is super handy for things like architecture photography. Usually, I like to do it by eye, just because landscape photography, you don't always have horizon lines. But in this scenario, yeah, I'm rolling just with eye. I then usually start with a preset. which is from my preset collection.
And you
Go
hit on one of my biggest pet peeves with Instagram.
Okay.
Instagram, if you're listening, why do we have to have a 4x5, 8x10 to have a portrait?
Hey, that's a very,
You don't force that with a landscape.
very good point.
Why is it forced with a portrait? But I digress. Continue.
There was a point where they actually introduced 16:9 photos,
Yeah.
but for a lot of Instagram users, especially the photographers, it was kind of a pain because you had to either flip your photos to a 16:9 landscape
Yeah.
or start shooting with 16:9 vertical in mind, and ended up not being the one.
That's
so,
even worse. Just
4x5
let it
the-
take the default that the camera gives us, please.
yeah.
Moving
Well,
on.
Maybe the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so usually I start off with a preset just to make my process a little bit easier, which I definitely recommend. I think presets are super, super valuable tools to increase the efficiency of our workflows. So I have a little set of presets that I use almost all the time. I also have a preset pack online, just in case you're interested. So this is a preset that I'm going to roll with. The reason I'm going for it is it's slightly cinematic. Now, obviously, I think a really important thing to point out with presets is that often the presets that you add to the image don't always look perfect off the bat. This one looks a little bit warm, so I'm going to bring the temperature down. So we bring some of those electric blues into the city and bringing some slightly more natural colors to the environment. So now I've got like kind of my base edit, which I think is looking pretty solid. And then I'm going to run through my basic treatments here with things like contrast, bring my highlights up, probably bring my blacks down, because at the moment we've in this preset there's quite a cinematic kind of faded look to it. I'm going to come to the curves as well to bring the blacks down so that we've got some real contrast, some real punch going on. This is mainly to focus in on the city lights. We're also going to bring some vibrance and saturation to really, really make those city lights punchy.
And while you're making it punchy, I have a question from the audience.
Okay.
And I get this question all the time, so I'm interested on your take on it.
Okay, I'm excited to answer it.
From the chat, why should a photographer use Lightroom as opposed to Photoshop?
That's a really good question. I actually use Lightroom and Photoshop all the time. Lightroom is for me, a finisher. So it also really depends on what the photo is. So I can show you guys how I use Photoshop in my workflow with this specific image, especially with some of the new releases in the generative AI and things like that. It actually is quite handy. But for me, I just usually do my base edits in Lightroom. You can still do this in Photoshop with Camera Raw. It's very, very similar, but I've just used Lightroom since I started out. So that's the main reason.
And my tag on to that, because you're absolutely right. If you think of Photoshop and Lightroom and you did like the standard Venn diagram where you overlap just a little bit, in that sliver in the middle would be the non-destructive editing, Camera Raw, Lightroom. Mm-hmm. But Photoshop does a million things that Lightroom doesn't do, and Lightroom does a million things that Photoshop doesn't do in terms of organization. I have over 250,000 photos. What am I going to do with Photoshop with those? Look at them in Bridge or look at them manually? No way. So Lightroom is my photo organizer first, my editor second.
Yes, it's definitely a really good catalog. And that's actually something that I use on a regular basis for me is collections. Now I'm going to kind of make this a little bit easier to understand here, but what I would do on a regular basis, let's say I want to shoot in New York, like this one, for example, I'll bring my favorite photos into collections, and collections just make it easier for me to select my favorite images, a little bit like, when you flag your images to find your favorite ones, then you can take it even further and put them in one little box in a collection to create the specific photos that stand out. So I'm gonna create a little collection right now just to show you. I'm gonna create a New York collection, and if we scroll down here, have a little look, there we go, that's the collection with 0 things in it. I'm gonna take it back to my New York page, give me 2 seconds here. Now I'm gonna drag this New York photo into the New York collection. And then we've just got one photo in there, which has no distractions from the other photos that I've taken from the trip.
And that photo could be in multiple collections.
Correct.
So think
of
of it
course.
like playlists for your music. You can have the same song in different playlists, same photo in different collections or albums.
Absolutely.
Another question that comes up, and this one, again, everyone has their own take on it. Which one should I use, Lightroom or Lightroom Classic?
Ooh.
I have my answer, but you're the guest.
That is a good question. Now, I think the main thing now with all of the new exciting updates is Lightroom Desktop. I use Lightroom Classic on a regular basis, but also use Lightroom Desktop and Lightroom Mobile. Like when I'm out shooting, for example, over the last few days I've been walking around LA planning for my photo walks, and also for the specific photo walk that I'm running in a few hours, I'm going to be focusing on Lightroom Mobile, and they have all of the new exciting AI features, for example, like AI bokeh and blur, which is really, really exciting. You can basically create lens blur that you haven't got. For example, you're using a phone, you don't have a lens, you don't have aperture to play around with. You can actually create and add in the blur in post in the new Lightroom Desktop and Lightroom Mobile. And that's probably what makes the Lightroom Desktop a little bit better than Lightroom Classic, is it comes out with, I think, a few more updates more regularly and in recent times. What would you add to that?
I would answer it really, it depends on the person and the way you like. How good are you at managing? How good are you at storage? How good are you at backup? If you tell me I'm organized, I'm great, my desk is always clean, everything, I know exactly where everything is.
Not me.
And you're that person, then you're probably a Lightroom Classic person, because that person knows where every photo is, where every drive's backed up at least in 3 places, and you're that person. That's great. If you're saying, oh my God, the idea of all of that scares me, and I just want to shoot and bring my stuff in and not think about it, and if disaster happens, I know I'm covered, then you're a Lightroom user, because your photos up until today were all backed up to the cloud. Now you get to choose because of the new local storage.
You raise a very good point. I am not an organized person, so that is definitely something that really, really stands out in a Lightroom Desktop for sure.
Right.
Shall I jump back into the edits?
Absolutely.
Okay, amazing.
And I have another question about your career, and it's basically, how would I get started as a paid, or like a paying gig as a travel photographer?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Now, to answer that question, I think I'm going to go way, way back to the start of my career, because I've been doing this now for about 10 years. I started when I was at school, when obviously getting paid wasn't the most important thing in the world because I was studying. But I'd say one of the most important things and helpful things to myself over the last 10 years has been growing a social audience. I think having social media and growing that really gets eyes on your work. So wherever you're shooting, whether it's outside your house, in your city at home, or in the environment while you're taking a hike, if you are consistently uploading to social media, then other people and clients can see your work and then reach out to you via email to try and get in contact for certain jobs. And that's what I've been doing since I started out. One of my first ever projects, I was found because of my Instagram following, and the marketing director that was there, he was already following me on Instagram, and they had this massive wall of people, like a wall of photographers, and he went, let's go for that guy, because I follow him on Instagram.
Right.
So that's what I'd say.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Continue with the edit.
Okay, so I'm going to continue. I've been playing around a little bit while we've been talking, but I then jump into, usually I set my curves up in my presets. So my curves are usually basically just adding a bit of extra contrast, playing around with the colors. I say one of the most important things, important learning curves that I went through with the curves, which I think is one of the hardest parts to master when it comes to Lightroom, and I'm still mastering it, is just playing around with it. Just, adding different colors in the highlights, adding blues, adding yellows, and seeing how they affect it with the mix of the RGB color curves overall. So that's how I got into the tone curves. So I moved through into the HSL, which is where I usually balance out and specify the colors that I'm focusing on. So in city photography, I think for me, something that's really important is the saturation and the colors that come through, mainly in the oranges and the blues, especially in this shot, and the reds of the car lights. So I'm just going to bring up that saturation and play around with some of the hues of the yellows to kind of really bring out the oranges. I'm a big fan of orange. Kind of roll with that teal and orange kind of cinema color scheme. I then move through to the color grading tab, which sometimes I add a lot of color grading or split toning, it used to be called, and often I don't really add anything. It's very dependent on the photo. This one has some blues in the shadows to again emphasize those city electric blues, and I brought some yellows into the highlights for that cinematic look. Another thing that I think is really, really handy, and a tip that I think not that many people know, is the sharpening tool and the masking tool. And this comes in super handy when you're specifying on one subject, and let's say, for example, your camera didn't grab the sharpness too well. This masking tool will really, really help. So I usually press Option, and then slide the masking tool, and
awesome.
It shows me exactly what the sharpening is focusing on. So I'm going to
all the white areas are being sharpened, all the dark areas are not.
Exactly. So for example, right here,
everything.
The whole thing is being sharpened. And we don't want that, because then it will end up just looking potentially a little bit too fake.
Overcooked.
So, exactly. So we're going to bring it all the way to the side and focus in on the roads and the cars and the city lights. And again, you can do this on any type of photo. Let's say, for example, you've taken a portrait and you want to increase the sharpness of the eyes. You can do this similar thing and see when it hits the eyes or the nose or the lips, and then decide there. So I think that's pretty solid. And then I can start adding my sharpening, and it adds it specifically to the white section of the image.
So another question from the chat: how much time do you spend on each edit?
Oh, that's another good question. It really ranges. It really depends. I'd say, on average, on an average day, I'd say it probably takes about 20 to 25 minutes. That's the whole workflow, from importing the shot to the Lightroom edit, and then taking it into Photoshop afterwards, and then exporting it, taking it back into Lightroom, and then adding the finishing touches, and then exporting. Probably about 25 minutes on average, I'd say. Yeah. So,
very cool.
One other thing that I think is a really cool addition, which has come this year to Lightroom, which I'm sure a lot of you know already, is the denoise noise reduction tool, which is all through AI. Luckily, this image actually isn't too noisy anyway. I've already got a bit of grain on there, so if we take that off, we can actually see what kind of noise we're working with. It's not too bad. Luckily, my camera dealt with the city lights pretty well, but it's always nice to see what this denoise tool will do. Sometimes it really is out of this world what it can remove. Let's give this a go. Sometimes it takes a second. So you can decide how much denoise you wanna make. So it gives you a zoomed in example of what the photo looks like before, and then you can turn it off and see how it looks before and after. So that's before. You can see you've got some noise there, and if we press denoise, it completely removes it. Sometimes it's a little bit more obvious than this one, but it's a really good tool. I'd recommend using it. Okay, so right. Usually, that's around the end of my Lightroom edit. It's a relatively simple process. It also, I think, one thing that I spend a lot of time on is the brushes, the gradients, and the radial gradients, and focusing on shaping light. I think that's a really important aspect of photography. Again, in this specific photo, it doesn't apply too much because it's a night edit, and I wouldn't really be shaping light too much. But let's say, for example, I have some light rays, and I've shot a rice terrace, and I have some light rays coming through the trees, and I want to emphasize those light rays a little bit. I will go into my brushes and select the light rays, and then bring up the exposure, the highlights, and the whites, just to kind of emphasize that lighting in the image, and often add things like vignetting with radial filters instead of vignetting, the actual vignetting tool in Lightroom. Yeah.
Another question that's not directly related to what you do, but you might have an answer. I'll give my answer as well.
Okay.
So where would you suggest starting to learn and get to know the features offered in order to enhance wedding photography images as an intermediate user. And so my answer to you would be the same answer I give people when they ask me, do I shoot weddings? Can I technically shoot a wedding? I've done it, I can, but it's not my specialty. So if you really want great wedding shots, you should probably go to someone who shoots weddings and that's their full-time thing. Same thing with learning. I could teach you how to enhance portraits and people, but if you really want to get that next level technique for wedding portraits and wedding shots, you should go learn from other wedding photographers. And there's tons of them out there on YouTube and other places.
Absolutely.
So if I was looking to learn travel photography editing, this is where I'd go, as opposed to someone who shoots weddings. They're not going to give me necessarily the best techniques.
That's a really good point.
For editing travel photography.
I think I'd add to that and say that in terms of learning, I think some of the best ways, just as you guys are right now, to learn is to get on YouTube and see the specific professionals in their field, as you said, and see how their workflow happens. You know, there's so much on YouTube, so much information. Like there's so many friends that I have that spend tons and tons of time showing their editing workflows and sharing it on YouTube. Another thing is courses. I think there are tons of incredible courses out there that will help you learn how to take your wedding photography to the next level.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, and this is an interesting one. It's similar to what I asked you earlier on, your favorite place you'd want to go back to.
Okay.
But this is about Lightroom.
Okay.
What tool in Lightroom could you not live without?
Damn, that is a good question, Matilda. I think I would have to say, I'd have to say the gradients and the brushes, I think. I mean, it's a little bit like my camera bag. There's a lot of things in there that I couldn't live without. So I think overall it's hard to pick a very specific one, but I think the gradients and the brushes really help me make the images my own. I'd say, I know that you said one, but
I know, I can't have one.
It's so difficult.
I got
at
least 2 or 3.
It really is. I'd also say the spot healing tool, which I think I usually use in Photoshop. I usually take that a little bit further in Photoshop just because I'm more used to the Photoshop system of spot healing, but I'm a big fan of removing distractions in my images, because I often feel like the way I look at my photos is I look at them in a similar way to how someone would be setting up a film shoot or a film movie poster. I'm trying to give an essence and a meaning to kind of the mood rather than specifically like a documentary photographer. So I like to remove things that distract from the main meaning of the image.
So for me, it's going to be 2 things at least. Because again, I go back to the whole reason I'm in Lightroom to begin with, and it's the organization, the collections, the albums.
Yes.
I can't do that anywhere else as easily and as effectively. But as far as a tool and editing feature, it's definitely the people masking. Because that's not even as easy to do in Photoshop as it is to do here.
It's true.
So the people masking, how powerful it is, automatically identifies multiple people in a shot, lets you pick facial hair, clothing, face skin, so forth and so on. The masking is amazing.
Yeah, I'd say that with the new AI blur as well, that's just been introduced, that's something that's really valuable in a very similar thing to that, is it allows you, if you don't have a really special lens that has a 1.2 aperture, for example, you can add that in post now, which is really exciting.
And you can even change what the bokeh looks like.
Yeah, exactly. You can change
the
it
shape.
To either circular or whether it's triangular or I think hexagonal. It's really cool.
So with that said, believe it or not, we're out of time. So we're going to wrap things up.
Cool, that was too quick.
What's the one thing you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I'd say one of the biggest things is if you want to get into professional photography, one of the main things to do that is to just do it every single day. Go out and take photos, get your photos into editing software, and just continually edit, continually take photos, and you will progressively get better every single day. I think that's probably the best piece of advice that I could give anyone that wants to get into the creative space.
Same thing with editing.
Definitely.
You want to get better at editing? Edit every day.
Edit every single day, and multiple hours of the day.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for watching, guys.
Follow us on
appreciate it.
Instagram. Follow us everywhere.
Please do. Catch you
Cheers.
later. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.